Hi, I'm Margaret Thompson, 32, back in Detroit. At my parents' anniversary, 50 relatives watched my father grin. He lifted a glass, then gutted me with practiced words. "You'll never amount to anything." The room pretended not to hear. For years, he stole credit for my work, called it mentorship. That night, something in me broke clean instead of bending. I decided to expose what he's done behind my back. The party wasn't a celebration, it was my ignition. And you won't believe what happened when I finally spoke. But this time, I wasn't leaving the room in silence. I grew up on Maple Street, suburban Detroit, middle child. Two brothers flanked me. Order and tradition flanked everything else. Dad, Frank, ran a factory floor. Mom, Helen, typed minutes. Dreams were measured by pay stubs and sensible shoes. At 8, I raided curbs for broken VCRs and towers. Spread circuit boards on newspaper. Learned the language of traces. 3 months later, my basement computer finally breathed a cursor. I sprinted upstairs glowing to show my small miracle. Frank never looked up. Beer sweating rings, paper snapping warnings. "Girls don't need computers, Margaret. Go help your mother." His words punctured me cleaner than a screwdriver through plastic. In high school, I built an inventory system from scratch. Predicted shortages, optimized orders, reduced waste with patient math. First place at regionals, state qualification, tiny newspaper photo. Dad missed it for overtime. Said competitions weren't real life. At home, he slept. My ribbons sat on silence. Counselor said MIT, I carried applications like contraband. Frank barked community college, secretarial track, sensible futures only. Girls don't become engineers. Be realistic, stop dreaming. I applied anyway, bagging groceries, tutoring, filing midnight essays. Acceptance arrived with 60% scholarship and shaking hands. Frank called it debt for a degree I'd never use. Meanwhile, my brothers earned applause for business plans and garages. I learned applause wasn't coming. I learned to journal. Keep receipts, keep dates, keep the version that doesn't vanish. At 18, I packed 2 suitcases and a blue ribbon. Boston felt terrifying, precise, like stepping onto honest ice. For once, brilliance wasn't weird, hunger wasn't feminine. Still, his voice traveled states and sat in lectures. "Don't get carried away," he'd say, even through memory. "Pass your classes, get a job, stop naming miracles." I should have known then. Approval wouldn't arrive with diplomas. I should have known the next theft was already walking. It wore my last name and smiled for our neighbors. But I wasn't ready for how far he'd go. MIT sharpened me like winter sharpens glass. Tiny dorm, bigger hunger, labs humming past midnight. I learned to debug without flinching, to ask precisely. Junior year, a problem hooked its teeth in me. Warehouses bled cash because guesses replaced math. I chased patterns through logs like tracks in new snow. Built an algorithm that listened harder than managers do. Seasonality, promos, shocks, each weight tuned and tested. Pilots cut waste by 30%, my advisor said. Publish and maybe patent. I phoned home because good news wants witnesses. "Dad, it works. Shelves won't go empty." He grunted. "Every student thinks their homework changes the world. Pass your classes, get a job, quit naming miracles." So I kept building, nights stitched with ramen and proofs. Presented at a conference. Industry folks asked for cards. I had no cards, just a cheap folder and fire. 6 months later, Mom's careful voice. "Don't be mad at your father." Trouble. Frank told his friend Bill about his warehouse idea. They installed a system like mine. It's working. Bill's sending thanks to Dad for the brilliant solution. The room tilted like a bad elevator. Did he say it came from me? Silence, then. He didn't want to complicate things with college projects. I confronted him. He laughed. "Academic theory," he said. "I simplified it so business could use. If anything, I improved you." That algorithm was months of proofs, not a fishing story. I printed drafts, dated commits, emails, receipts, filed them in a box labeled, "Property, do not edit." New rule. Protect your work. Some thieves share your last name. Senior year, I shipped code, shipped grades, shipped boundaries. Graduated summa, packed 2 suitcases and a promise. San Francisco buzzed like voltage I could finally hold. Small team, real users. We listened to pain points breathe. I rewrote core tools. Crashes dropped. Clients stayed. Janet slid a promotion across the table, smiling. I called home. Habit is hard muscle. He minimized with me, bragged to neighbors later. 2 stories, 1 mouth, whichever earned shinier applause. I started a company at my kitchen table. Thompson Database Solutions. Stubborn founder. Stubborn results. 12 restaurants, then more. Spreadsheets became living systems. Trade magazines called. We grew. I bought a house. He warned it was foolish. A money pit, paper profits. Then waved the magazine and called himself my mentor. Pride in public, dismissal in private, the axis of him. I kept receipts and kept moving. Momentum is quiet until someone tries to stop it. And someone was always ready with a toast and a knife. I thought the algorithm theft was the worst of it. I hadn't seen how far his fiction had traveled. How many ears he'd trained to clap on cue. The anniversary would hand me the microphone. I was ready. Growth came fast. Referrals, contracts, lights that stayed late. A trade magazine ran a spread. Clients called me founder. Back home, a different story was already on tour. Aunt Carol sent a church bulletin. Frank Thompson, mentor to his tech entrepreneur daughter, Margaret. It claimed he'd guided my business plan from day one. None of those words were mine or true. Uncle Raymond texted a plant newsletter photo. Dad holding a plaque. Lean innovation, warehouse efficiency. Caption, Frank's idea reduced waste across partner facilities. The idea matched my junior year algorithm. I called Mom. Why is he credited for my work? Silence. He likes how it sounds, she said. I can't keep correcting him when people clap. Neighbors tagged me praising Dad's business sense. Relatives sent congrats for the company we built together. History was being rewritten with his name in the margins. I flew to Detroit to prep the anniversary party. 50 guests, catering, flowers, a jazz trio. Paid deposits, mapped seating, hid cords. Dad hovered like a foreman over someone else's steel. To the florist. I chose Helen's colors myself. To the caterer. Keep the ribs, my idea front and center. If a sentence started with I, he wore it. Credit was a coat he never took off. In the den, a manila folder waited on a chair. Anniversary, talking points, Frank. My name appeared 6 times before page 2. Praise braided to erasure. Margaret's always been a dreamer, one line read. High-tech toys, expensive lessons. I kept her grounded. Mentored her through turbulence. Told her when to pivot. Real success comes from practical men and steady hands. A script for theft performed as affection. I closed the folder and breathed. That night I printed what I'd avoided. The science fair clipping, the MIT letter, the conference program, emails from clients, dated contracts, option grants, a photo of Dad's plaque beside my abstract. I slid them into sleeves, tabbed like a courtroom, not to humiliate, only to puncture the myth. If truth needs oxygen, paper is how it breathes. If memory fails, timestamps don't. I rehearsed once, then closed the binder. Not a speech, just coordinates back to reality. Tomorrow the room would hear 2 versions of me, polished and paternal, and inconvenient, true. I wasn't a footnote in his victory lap anymore. I was the author, stepping onto my own page. The toast would come, and with it the cut. By 6, the house was dressed like a memory. String lights, polite jazz, 50 plates waiting for a toast. Frank clinked his glass. 25 years and a lesson on success. He praised my brothers for practical careers, steady hands, real work. Then his eyes found me like a searchlight across the room. Our Margaret's a dreamer, he said. High-tech toys, not real work. Between us, she'll never amount to anything substantial. Forks froze. Helen stared at the floor. I stood with the binder in my hand, breath steady. If we're doing honesty, I said, let's do all of it. Don't make a scene, he hissed. You made it, I said back. I faced the room. You've heard his version for years. Here's mine, and I brought dates to match it. High school science fair, blue ribbon. He skipped it as trivial. MIT acceptance with scholarship. He said, women don't belong. I worked 2 jobs and paid for the rest. Conference abstract for my inventory algorithm. He gave it to Bill, and Bill thanked him loudly. Magazines spread on my San Francisco team and product. He called it hype to me, then bragged he mentored it. Plant newsletter with his plaque reading lean innovation. That so-called innovation was my junior year algorithm. Ask my advisor. The timestamps don't stutter or forget. Frank tried. She's emotional. Correct, I answered, not confused. For 20 years he dismissed me in private and quiet, then wore my work in public like a suit that fit. If you think I'll never amount to anything, Dad, stop telling people you built me from the ground. The room exhaled. Uncle Raymond said, I'm sorry. I believed him. Aunt Carol nodded with wet eyes. We all did. Maybe I misspoke, Frank murmured. I was proud. Helen stood. That wasn't pride, it was manipulation for years. My brothers crossed over, awkward and finally honest. We should have said something, David said. We didn't know, Michael added. Frank tried one more angle. I prepared you for the real world. I built one, I said. You took the credit. I closed the binder, final but not loud. From now on, no more borrowed stories about my work. No fake mentorship, no edits, no convenient myths. Speak the truth about me or don't speak at all. No applause. Just air getting honest in small clusters. I packed the documents. Helen squeezed my hand, permission granted. Frank stared at the glass he'd raised to cut me. It looked small in his big, practiced hand. At the hallway photos, my caption watched me pass. Good with computers had lived there like a shrug. Rewrite it, I told Helen gently, or take it down. Outside, Michigan night finally stopped pretending to be kind. I didn't run or cry. I chose the door instead. Not an exit this time. An entrance I'd postponed for years. I thought speaking up would end it. I should have known the aftermath would try to rewrite me again. The next morning, my phone tried to reopen the scene. Missed calls, careful texts, a long message from Aunt Carol. Frank posted nothing. For once, silence was accurate. I wrote one email, short, dated, saved with the others. If my work is mentioned, speak truth or skip my name. No interviews on my behalf. No mentorship claims. Any repeat requires public correction. Consider this final. I didn't wait for replies. I went to work. We signed 2 new clients before lunch. The team cheered. I ordered pizza, raised a paper cup, and breathed. Not triumph, clarity, the luxury of being fully named. That week I flew back to San Francisco, light. I met with our interns, 3 women from Detroit schools. We drew database schemas and talked about gatekeepers' voices. Keep notes, I said. Keep receipts. Keep your spine. Helen called on Sunday from the quiet kitchen. I changed the caption, she said, voice steady, almost proud. Now it reads, Margaret, engineer, founder, the one who built. Sometimes love arrives late, but it still knows the door. Frank didn't apologize. He adjusted. Less boasting, fewer edits. Boundaries aren't punishments. They're operating manuals for staying human. I learned approval can be a leash with a bow. Cutting it isn't cruelty. It's finally walking your pace. I stopped auditioning for a father who wanted understudies. I stopped shrinking so his story could fit the frame. When relatives asked what happened, I told it plain. Not rage. Records. Not gossip, gravity. The truth holds. At night, I kept the binder on the shelf. Visible, but closed. I don't reread it to ache. I keep it the way you keep a fire extinguisher. Hoping you won't need it. Grateful you have it. If you're living under someone else's narration, hear me. Your work is not a costume for another person's stage. You can love and leave, forgive and still refuse access. You can draw a line and call it home. What broke me wasn't one toast, one sentence, one room. It was the slow scrape of being unnamed for years. What remade me was simple, ordinary, stubborn repetition. Say your name. Say your work. Say it again. I'm Margaret Thompson. I built this with both hands. The door I chose wasn't an exit. It was entrance. There's space here for anyone ready to be whole. Bring your notes. Bring your breath. I saved you a chair. If you've faced this, credit stolen, voice dismissed, story bent, you're not alone. Tell me in the comments below. Have you ever had to claim your name back? Like, subscribe, share this with someone who needs a spine today.
The day the final payment cleared, I came home with a quiet kind of triumph. For years, the mortgage had felt like a second heartbeat, steady and relentless. But now, the weight was gone. I set the keys on the kitchen table, letting myself breathe in the silence of victory. Morella's heels clicked across the tile, sharp as her voice. "Perfect," she said, lips curving into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Now hand over the keys. This house belongs to your sister." I blinked. Sure, I'd misheard. But Celine was already drifting through the living room with her phone held high, narrating a video tour for her followers. "And here's my new place," she chirped, panning across the walls I had painted late into the night after work. The room tilted. My throat tightened as if every sacrifice, every sleepless hour had been erased in a single breath. My chest rose with words I wanted to shout that every dollar had been mine, that this house stood because of me, but no sound came. Instead, I froze, holding the weight of their smug glances. Morella tapped her fingers against the counter. "Don't make this dramatic. You've done your part. Now, let Celine live the life she deserves." Heat surged under my skin, but I forced my voice steady. I leaned forward, meeting my mother's eyes, and whispered 4 words. Just 4, but they stopped her mid-smirk, her breath catching as color drained from her face. Celine laughed, dismissing me with a flick of her wrist. Marilla recovered quickly, narrowing her eyes. "You don't mean that," she said, voice brittle, but her hand trembled as she reached for the keys. I didn't move them. I only sat back, letting the silence stretch, already knowing this was only the beginning. When Marilla's finances collapsed, it was like a quiet storm no one else seemed to notice. Bills stacked on the counter, late notices hidden under magazines, and the steady hum of her voice insisting everything was handled. I knew better. I was the one who stepped into the bank, signed my name on the papers, and agreed to a mortgage that would bleed me $7,500 every month. I told myself it was temporary, a bridge until my mother regained her footing. That bridge stretched into years. I worked through nights when the glow of my laptop was the only light in the house, taking side projects, answering emails at dawn, canceling vacations before they were even planned. My salary went into the payments, my side income into repairs and upgrades. I carried it all quietly, believing silence was a form of love. Marilla took that silence and twisted it. She told neighbors and relatives I was comfortable, that I didn't really carry weight. My sacrifices, invisible by design, became fuel for her story that I contributed less than I did. And Celine, well, she was always the chosen one. When we were girls, Marilla cheered for her smallest victories, Celine's solo in the school play, her passing grade in math. For me, the bar shifted higher each time. "Your season will come," she'd say, patting my shoulder as if patience were a prize. I believed her for far too long. Even our neighbor Mrs. Keaton once tilted her head as she watched Celine's car parked in my assigned spot. "Why do they always take your space?" she asked. I laughed it off, saying it didn't matter, though deep down I knew it did. Every compromise, every quiet surrender had trained them to believe my sacrifices were air. And now, on the day I finally cleared the mortgage, they stood in my kitchen, acting as if the house had never been mine. Looking back, I realized my mother's demand for the keys hadn't been born that day. It had been rehearsed for years, whispered like prophecy whenever Celine stumbled and Marilla needed to soothe her bruised pride. "One day this house will be your start," she told her, over and over, as if my work and sacrifices were just placeholders for Celine's comfort. Celine tried her hand at everything, an online boutique that folded within months, a pop-up jewelry stall that drained credit cards, a wellness blog that ended when she couldn't commit to posting. Each time she failed, Marilla rushed to soften the fall, a loan disguised as a gift, rent quietly covered, excuses spun at family gatherings about how Celine was just too creative to be boxed in. The rescues only strengthened her entitlement. Why fight for stability when it was always delivered to her doorstep? I became the contrast, steady, unglamorous, dependable. To Marilla, my coding job was invisible labor, while Celine's flailing ventures were celebrated as ambition. Marilla called her the daughter who looked like success, polished and photogenic enough to carry the family's image. I was the one who paid, but she was the one paraded. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. My mother's smile when she asked for the keys wasn't spontaneous. It was the final act of a script she'd been directing for decades. Celine playing the heroine, Marilla orchestrating the applause, and me cast as the stagehand who disappears when the curtain falls. That night, sitting with the weight of their expectation pressing against me, I understood. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a sudden burst of greed. It was the story they had written long before I ever signed the mortgage papers, and they truly believed I would follow the script to the end. I watched Marilla's hand hover above the keys, her nails glinting under the kitchen light. The room felt too small. Every breath caught in the air between us. I leaned forward and said the 4 words again, slowly this time, letting them sink into the silence. "Check your certified mail." For a moment, no one moved. Celine laughed as if I had told a bad joke, waving her phone around to capture the moment. But Marilla's eyes narrowed, She knew me well enough to sense the weight in my voice. What she didn't know was how long I had been preparing for this day. Months earlier, when she first hinted that the house should be signed over to Celine once you're done paying, something inside me shifted. That night, after they had gone to bed, I opened my laptop and sent an email to Graham Ortiz, a real estate attorney I'd met through a client. I told him I needed clarity, maybe even protection. Graham was calm, methodical. He checked the title. Every line confirmed the house was mine alone. He walked me through options most people never think about until it's too late. Notices revoking informal occupancy, scheduled lock changes with civil standby, protective orders if harassment crossed the line. It felt extreme at first, almost paranoid, but each time Marella dropped another comment about Celine's future here, I realized caution was my only safeguard. We created a plan the final mortgage payment would trigger the next steps. Documents were drafted, ready to send. A locksmith was scheduled for the morning after payoff, with an officer notified in advance. Every safeguard was set quietly in motion. So when I whispered those words to my mother, I wasn't bluffing. I was calling in months of careful preparation. The same silence I had once used to keep the peace now became my shield. One signed page at a time. Morella's smirk faltered, her hand retreating from the keys. She tried to recover, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. Celine rolled her eyes, convinced I was bluffing. I let them believe whatever they wanted. By the next morning, they would know the truth. 2 nights later, Marella insisted on a family dinner. She called it a celebration, though I knew it was something else. The dining room was crowded with aunts, uncles, and cousins who had been drawn in by promises of a big announcement. I stayed quiet at the end of the table, watching as Marella lifted her glass with a practiced smile. "To Celine," she declared, her voice ringing with pride. "Tonight we celebrate her new beginning in this beautiful home." Applause rippled around the table. Chairs scraped as people leaned in to hug her, their words spilling over with congratulations. I felt my fork slip in my hand. "This isn't Celine's house," I said, my voice clear but even. "I made every payment. The deed is in my name." The room fell briefly still before Morella's laugh cut through the silence. "You see, always dramatic. Don't spoil the moment." Murmurs of agreement followed, eyes turning toward me with polite disapproval. Celine leaned back, smirking. "Relax, Novalie. You can crash on someone's couch for a while. Maybe it'll be good for you." Heat flushed through me, but I didn't take the bait. Instead, I slipped my phone under the table. Opening my email, I typed quickly, attaching photos of the title documents, mortgage receipts, and the draft notices Graham had helped prepare. With a single click, the evidence was on its way to his inbox. Morella's voice rose again, triumphant as she painted me ungrateful before the relatives. I watched her bask in their approval, not realizing every word was another piece of proof. I didn't need to shout to make myself heard. The record was speaking louder than I ever could. When the plates were cleared and the laughter died down, I knew the stage they had built for me was collapsing, and I had already moved the play elsewhere. After the dinner, I stepped outside into the night air, the weight of their voices still pressing against my chest. I pulled out my phone, scrolled past unread messages, and tapped the only number that mattered. Graham answered on the second ring, his tone steady as ever. "It's time," I said. He didn't need me to explain. We had rehearsed this moment too many times already. Within the hour, a courier was scheduled to deliver the notice of revocation of license to occupy. Every word of that document had been drafted weeks earlier, signed, notarized, and waiting for the day the final payment cleared. The house might have felt like a battlefield, but on paper, it was mine alone. Graham confirmed the rest of the plan, the locksmith appointment for early morning, the civil standby arranged through the local precinct, even a temporary protective order drafted in case Marella or Celine tried to force their way back in. Nothing about this was sudden. It was the quiet architecture of foresight, built while everyone else mocked me for being too cautious. I sat in my car outside the house, the glow from the dashboard painting the silence around me. For the first time in years, my lungs filled all the way. I had spent so long bending under their expectations, shrinking myself to keep peace that never existed. Now the balance was shifting, not with shouting or fists on the table, but with signed pages and a single phone call. By midnight, Graham texted courier confirmed. Documents will be in their hands by morning. I read the message twice, steadying my breath. I wasn't the powerless daughter they believed I was. I was the one who had prepared, the one who saw their script and wrote my own ending. I turned the key in the ignition, driving back toward the house with calm in my chest. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of choice pressing against my palms, and it was mine to hold. Dawn broke without sound. No clatter of dishes from the kitchen, no hum of the television in the living room, no voices carrying down the hall. I moved through the stillness of the house I had carried on my back for years and felt, for the first time, that it belonged to me. At the front door, the courier's envelope hung by a strip of tape, the bold type on the front impossible to miss. Notice of revocation of license to occupy. The words that had lived in drafts for months were now here in ink, undeniable, inside, by the entryway. I had already bagged their scattered belongings. Each duffel and box was neatly labeled Celine's clothes, Morella's trinkets, spare shoes, bathroom kits. Nothing tossed, nothing broken, no excuse for them to claim cruelty. Order was its own kind of statement. When the locksmith's van pulled into the drive, an officer followed close behind. Both men greeted me calmly, as if this were routine, which, in truth, it was. Locks changed every day, notices delivered every day. Today just happened to be mine. Morella shuffled into the hall, robe tied loose, her face creased with sleep. She froze at the sight of the officer, then tore the envelope from the door. Her hands shook as she unfolded the pages, eyes scanning the lines. I watched the color drain from her face the moment she understood. "You," she whispered, voice cracking. I stepped closer, steady and quiet. "Check your certified mail." The 4 words I had given her before now returned, no longer a warning, but a fact. She clutched the paper, lips moving as if to form a protest. But nothing came. By the time the new locks clicked into place, the silence of the house no longer felt heavy. It felt clean, as though something had finally been swept out. By afternoon, Morella was on the phone with every relative she could reach. Her voice carried through the walls, trembling with outrage as she painted me ungrateful and cold. She repeated the same line to anyone who would listen, that I had stolen the house from under my sister. But words travel faster than she expected. And so do documents, screenshots of my mortgage receipts, the title in my name, and even the notices Graham had prepared began to circulate quietly among the family. One cousin messaged me directly, saying, "I didn't know you carried all of that by yourself." Another wrote, "She's been telling a very different story." The cracks spread quickly, her version of events losing polish each time the truth surfaced. Celine's fury arrived next. She stormed into the living room, waving the notice as if it might change if she shook it hard enough. "You promised me, Mom!" she hissed, loud enough for me to hear from the hall. "You said this would be mine." Morella tried to hush her, but Celine's anger broke through years of careful shielding. Their alliance bent, then snapped. With the shouting came the memory's old betrayals pushed into daylight. The time Morella had used my savings account to cover one of Celine's failed ventures without asking. The night Celine had listed the house online as an event space for her friends, leaving me to deal with strangers knocking on my door. Every compromise I had swallowed came rushing back, undeniable now that the walls echoed with their arguments. That evening, Mrs. Keaton stopped me by the mailbox. Her eyes were kind. Her words simple. "It's not cruel," she said softly, "to lock a door that keeps stealing your sleep." I nodded, the truth of it settling deep in my chest. The house was quieter than it had ever been, but in that silence, something new was beginning to take shape. With the shouting gone, the house felt like bare wood waiting for new paint. I started small, rolling a fresh coat of color over the walls that had once carried Morella's floral wallpaper. The scent of paint replaced the heavy perfume that used to linger in the halls. Each brushstroke felt like reclaiming space I had long ago surrendered. I cleared the guest room and set up a studio for my work. My desk faced the window now, sunlight spilling across clean surfaces instead of dim corners. The space no longer felt like a hiding place. It was mine, open and steady. For the first time in years, I invited people in. Friends from work came by for tea, their voices rising in easy laughter that filled the rooms. Mrs. Keaton joined us too, bringing lemon cookies on a tray, and she smiled as if she'd been waiting for this moment longer than I had. The same rooms that had once echoed with hostility now hummed with warmth. I laid out new rules and kept them simple: no guests without consent, no filming or posting the house online. The rules weren't for anyone else, they were for me, proof that I would no longer let my silence be mistaken for permission. When Graham stopped by to check on me, he glanced at the changes and nodded. "A boundary is a contract you keep with yourself," he said. I knew then that these walls, freshly painted and breathing with light, were no longer just shelter. They were the outline of a new life, one I had built on my own terms. And as the house settled into its new rhythm, I could feel the final test still waiting on the horizon. It didn't take long for Morella and Celine to circle back. They showed up together one afternoon, their smiles tight, their words polished. Morella spoke first, dressing it all in the language of family optics. She insisted we needed to appear united, that neighbors and relatives were misunderstanding the situation. Celine nodded along, though her eyes flicked around the house as if still searching for a corner she might claim. I listened without interrupting. Then I laid my terms on the table, calm but unbending. Therapy, together and apart. An apology that named the years of harm instead of skimming over them. And most of all, no mention of the title. Not once. Not ever again. Their faces faltered, the performance cracking. They had expected forgiveness handed out like another check to cash. What they received instead was a mirror. After they left, silence settled back into the walls. I gathered my papers and went to the notary, filing an estate plan that locked down the house's future. If they ever thought to claw at it again, they would find iron instead of flesh. Driving home, I felt lighter. A house, I realized, is nothing but wood and walls. It can be built, sold, or lost. But a home is different. It is the space where you refuse to barter away your dignity. That was what I had built here, not with money alone, but with the choice to stop shrinking myself. I locked the door that evening, watered the fern on the porch, and picked up my bag for work. Behind me, the house stood quiet, mine in more ways than a deed could ever prove. The day began like any other alarm at 6. Coffee brewed on autopilot, and a quick glance at my budget app before heading to the office. My one-bedroom apartment wasn't much, but it was mine. The rent took a heavy bite out of my paycheck, and the rest was divided between bills, groceries, and the small emergency fund I was forever trying to grow. I had long ago learned to stretch every dollar until it thinned to paper by the time I clocked out. My birthday had become just another long Tuesday. Still, I stopped at the gas station on the corner, as I did every Friday, to buy my weekly lottery ticket. $10 was my usual splurge, my small, harmless rebellion against the relentless practicality of my life. This time, though, I slid a 20 across the counter. Birthday treat. I told the clerk, half joking, half hoping. He smiled, printed the tickets, and wished me luck. That evening, I celebrated alone with leftover Thai takeout and a glass of boxed wine. The TV murmured in the background while I scrolled through social media, skimming photos of friends in nicer clothes, at fancier dinners, living lives that always seemed just out of reach. Around 9, I remembered the tickets, tossed casually on the kitchen counter. I pulled them toward me and opened the lottery website on my phone. The first number matched, then the second. My breath caught at the third. By the time I matched all 6, my hands were trembling so badly I had to set the phone down. $1.4 million. After taxes. Still more than I could have earned in a decade. I stared at the screen, waiting for the rush of joy I thought would come. It didn't. Instead, a chill settled in my chest. I'd read too many stories of lottery winners whose lives imploded under the weight of other people's expectations. My family had a long memory for money, especially when it wasn't theirs. I knew exactly how quickly the news would spread, how suddenly every conversation would circle back to what I could do for them. I closed the browser, folded the ticket carefully, and tucked it deep into my desk drawer. I wouldn't tell anyone, not my parents, not my siblings, not even my closest friend. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The next morning, I woke with a strange calm. The money was mine, but the real challenge would be keeping it that way. And to do that, I needed to remember exactly who I was dealing with. I didn't have to think hard to remember why I couldn't share the news. My family had been writing their history on the backs of my check stubs for years, and my name was always the one in the from column when my mother, Vivian, called 3 years ago about the roof leaking over her sunroom. She asked for just a little temporary help. She promised she'd pay me back as soon as Harold, her husband, closed a property sale. I wired her $3,000 that same day. The next month, instead of repayment, I got photos of them smiling on a weekend trip to Napa. The subject of the roof money never came up again. Dorian, my older brother, was worse. His requests always came wrapped in drama, urgent bills, car trouble, medical scares. I'd send what I could, sometimes draining my savings, only to see him post pictures on social media from beaches and music festivals. When I confronted him once, he laughed it off, saying I worried too much. Rhea, my younger sister, made her play during wedding season. She swore she'd pay back the $2,000 I put on my credit card for her florist and caterer as soon as the thank you cards go out. 5 years later. The debt remained, along with a string of excuses about kids, mortgages, and unexpected expenses. In that landscape of IOUs that never returned, Aunt Lenore stood out like a clear patch of sky. She lived in a tiny bungalow, drove a car older than I was, and worked extra hours at the school just to cover rising costs. Yet she'd slip me a 20 when she heard my car needed an oil change, or bake casseroles to fill my freezer when I was swamped at work. Her help was never much in dollars, but it was always real, always offered without strings. As I stared at the winning ticket tucked into my desk, those memories lined up in sharp relief. I knew who I could trust, and who would see me as nothing more than a sudden solution to their problems. That meant my next move had to be careful. 2 days after the win, I drove to Portland to meet with a financial advisor whose name I found through a referral chain that ended in a former client who valued privacy above all else. His office sat high in a downtown tower, the kind of place where every surface gleamed and every voice was measured. Philip Garrison greeted me with a handshake that was warm without being invasive. Once the door closed behind us, I slid the ticket across his desk. His eyes flicked over the numbers, a brief lift of his brow betraying his surprise, before his face returned to a calm, professional mask. We spent 2 hours in quiet, methodical discussion. He explained the structure of a revocable trust that could claim the winnings on my behalf, ensuring my name never appeared in public records. We mapped out a strategy that spread the funds into multiple investment accounts, low risk, steady growth, and set aside a smaller, liquid account I could access for day-to-day needs without drawing attention. When I asked about common mistakes lottery winners made, he didn't hesitate. The fastest way to lose your peace, he said, is to tell the wrong person. Once you do, you can't take it back. People will treat you differently, even if they think they're not." I nodded, feeling the truth of it settle in my stomach. Keeping quiet wasn't just about protecting the money, it was about protecting myself from the slow erosion of trust that would follow. By the time I left, I had a folder of documents, a detailed action plan, and a list of next steps. The ticket was no longer a flimsy scrap of paper. It was a verified claim tucked into the machinery of legal protection. Driving home, I realized nothing in my outer life could change, not yet. I would still clock in at the office every morning, still shop the grocery sales, still drive my dented Corolla. The win was real, but until I knew exactly who I was dealing with, it had to stay invisible. And that meant finding a way to see my family clearly, without the money distorting the view. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't just want to keep my secret, I wanted proof. Proof of who would stand with me when there was nothing to gain. That's how the idea formed. Quiet at first, then insistent I would create a crisis and see who answered the call. $5,000. Enough to sting. Enough to matter. But not an impossible ask for the people in my family who claimed to care. The story would be simple: my company had shut down unexpectedly after losing its biggest client. My severance wouldn't come through for weeks, and recent medical bills had wiped out my savings. I needed help with rent and utilities until I found a new job. As soon as I thought it through, the doubt crept in. Was this manipulative? Was I setting them up to fail? I told myself it wasn't about trapping anyone. It was about protecting myself. If they couldn't be counted on when I was supposedly broke, why would I trust them if they knew I was a millionaire? I started drafting the details like a script. I researched recent corporate closures to make my story plausible. I practiced sounding weary but not desperate, making sure to leave just enough space for them to choose without feeling pressured. My goal wasn't to guilt them, it was to see their natural reaction. Then I opened a notebook and wrote down each name: my mother Vivian, my stepfather Harold, my father Martin, my stepmother Candace, my brother Dorian, my sister Rhea, my cousin Brett, and Aunt Lenore. Beside each, I jotted predictions. Vivian might offer a small amount but suggest asking someone else. Harold, no. Martin, lecture, no money. Candace, no. With judgment. Dorian, disappear. Rhea, sympathy. No cash. Brett, promise to help. Then vanish. Lenore, she'd give what she could, even if it was less than I asked. Looking at the list, I felt a knot tighten in my chest. This was my family, reduced to a column of expected refusals. I closed the notebook, my jaw set. If I was going to face the truth, I needed to face it completely, and that meant starting the calls the very next day. I decided to start with my mother. Vivian had always claimed she would do anything for her children, but I'd learned over the years that anything usually meant advice or concern, not sacrifice. Still, she was my mother, and a part of me wanted to believe she might surprise me. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright. I eased into my story, describing the company's sudden closure, the severance delay, and the medical bills. She gasped in the right places, her tone softening with each detail. But when I told her I needed $5,000, her voice shifted. Oh, honey, I wish I could, but Harold and I just put the down payment on the lake house. Things are tight right now. Have you tried asking your father, or maybe Rhea Paul's doing so well in tech these days? The gentle deflection stung more than an outright no. I thanked her anyway, told her I'd figure something out, and hung up. My father was next. Martin's greeting was brisk, almost suspicious, as if he sensed I wanted something. I gave him the same story, though his face, at least in my mind, remained unchanged. When I asked for help, he leaned into the familiar role of lecturer. Ilara, this is exactly why I've told you to keep 6 months of expenses saved. What happened to that plan I explained about the medical bills and the rent? But it didn't matter. I'd love to help. But Candace and I are focusing on our retirement. You need to see this as a learning opportunity. His words carried the finality of a closed door. By the time I called my sister, I'd braced myself for more of the same. Rhea was warm from the start, her voice rising in sympathy when I told her the news. That's awful. Ilara. I can't believe they just closed like that. For a moment, I let myself believe she might say yes, but then came the pivot. We just bought the new SUV last month, and the kids' tuition is due. Plus, we're remodeling the master bath. Paul handles the finances, and he's really strict about the budget. But listen, why don't you come stay with us for a bit? We can clear out the guest room. You could save on rent until you find something new. It was an offer, but not the one I'd asked for. Moving into her world, even temporarily, would mean giving up control and becoming a living reminder of her generosity. I thanked her, saying I needed to stay in the city for interviews. 3 conversations in, my predictions were holding, and with each call, the gap between what I hoped for and what I received was widening fast. I didn't expect much from Dorian, but I still gave him the same chance I'd given everyone else. I texted first, explaining briefly that I needed to talk. No reply. I called that evening straight to voicemail. The next day, I tried again, then sent a follow-up message. I really need to speak with you. It's important. Silence. By the end of the week, I stopped trying. He'd made his choice. Candace, my stepmother, didn't bother with small talk when I called. I told her about the job loss, the medical bills, the rent. She cut me off halfway through. Ilara, I'm sorry, but the answer's no. You should think about downsizing your apartment or finding a roommate. It's not wise to live beyond your means. I almost reminded her that I wasn't the one leasing luxury cars or posting vacation photos every other month. But I bit my tongue. The conversation was over before it began. Harold, my stepfather, was even more blunt. You're not my responsibility. He said, as soon as I explained what I needed, I've supported your mother for years, but your financial problems are your own. Maybe you should have chosen a career that paid better. There was nothing more to say after that. Brett, my cousin, surprised me at first when I called. He was immediately sympathetic, offering to meet for lunch and give me a check. You've always been good to me. Ilara, I'll take care of you, he said. For a moment, I felt a flicker of hope, but the morning we were supposed to meet, he texted an hour before something came up. Let's reschedule. We never did. My calls after that went unanswered. The pattern was becoming painfully clear. The ones who'd needed me in the past had no trouble disappearing when the roles reversed. And for those who didn't vanish outright, their refusals were wrapped in justifications that made them feel noble for keeping their wallets shut. By the time I crossed the last name off my list, the results were almost exactly as I'd predicted. Almost. There was still one person I hadn't called, not because I was saving her for last, but because part of me already knew how she'd respond. Aunt Lenore didn't need a script to prove who she was. 2 days after I'd crossed the last name off my list, my phone rang. The caller ID read Lenore. I hadn't reached out to her yet, but her voice came warm and direct. Ilara, honey, I just heard from someone sounds like you've had some bad luck at work. Are you okay for a moment? I almost dropped the act entirely, but I kept to my script, telling her about the job loss and the bills. She didn't ask for proof or press for details. Instead, she said, let's have lunch tomorrow. My treat. We met at a small diner she loved, a place with chipped mugs and pies in glass cases by the register, after we'd finished eating. She reached into her purse and pulled out a plain white envelope. I want you to take this, she said, sliding it across the table. Inside was a neat stack of bills, $3,000. I stared at it, my throat tightening. Lenore, I can't take this. It's too much. Nonsense, she said firmly. It's not the full amount you need. I know, but it'll help with rent. And if you need a place to stay. My sofa pulls out. It's not fancy, but it's yours for as long as you need it. Her words didn't feel like charity. They felt like safety. I thought about the others about excuses and closed doors, and the contrast was almost too much to process. She had the least to spare, yet here she was, giving me nearly everything she had without hesitation. I slipped the envelope into my bag, promising to pay her back as soon as I could. The guilt burned, but so did the gratitude. This was the answer I'd been looking for, the proof that someone in my family's love wasn't measured against a balance sheet. As I drove home, the envelope sat heavy in my bag, a reminder that my test had revealed more than I was ready to face, and it was time to stop pretending with at least one person. The next evening, I asked Lenore to come by for tea when she settled onto my couch, her hands wrapped around the warm mug. I knew I couldn't keep the truth from her any longer. "I need to tell you something," I began. "I didn't lose my job. The whole story I told you, it was a test. I wanted to see who in the family would help if I needed it, and you were the only one who did." I hesitated, then went further. 3 weeks ago, I won the lottery. $1.4 million. You're the first person I've told. Lenore didn't look shocked so much as thoughtful. After a long sip of tea, she said, "I understand why you did it, but I'm sad you felt you had to." She set her cup down and leaned back. "Years ago, when my grandmother died, I inherited $35,000. Your uncle convinced me to invest in his friend's restaurant, said it was a sure thing. Within a year, the place folded, and every cent was gone. He told me it was our money, not just mine, and I had no right to be angry." She shook her head. "That's when I learned money doesn't just show who others are. It shows who you are." Her words landed with weight. I realized she was right, not just about them, but about me. This win could turn me into someone cautious and bitter, or someone deliberate and generous. I decided then that I'd make sure Lenore never had to worry about rent, bills, or medicine again, but in a way that would never make her feel like a charity case. Before the night ended, we were already talking about what I needed to do next, that Sunday. My apartment felt smaller than usual as every chair filled. My mother and Harold sat together on the couch, Martin and Candace by the window, Rhea with her arms folded, and even Dorian lingering near the kitchen. Brett leaned against the wall, scrolling his phone until I cleared my throat. "Thank you for coming," I began. "I wanted to clear up a few things. I'm fine. I've accepted a better paying position with great benefits, and I'll be transitioning next month." Relief flickered across a few faces, as if they'd come expecting me to ask for more money. "But," I continued, when I thought I was in trouble, "I reached out to you, and the responses I got told me a lot about where I stand in this family." Vivian glanced at Harold, then back at me. "We all have our own financial commitments. Ilara, it's not always possible to help." Martin's voice took on that familiar lecturing tone. "You can't expect others to solve your problems." "That's not how life works." Rhea shifted uncomfortably. "I offered you a place to stay. That counts for something." Dorian didn't look up from the floor. I was dealing with my own stuff. Their excuses washed over me, familiar as the pattern they'd repeated for years. But this time, I didn't let them slide. I'm not here to argue. I just want to be clear, those days when I emptied my savings to bail someone out, they're over. I'm done being the family's safety net. The silence that followed was thick, but I didn't feel it. When the meeting broke up, most left without looking me in the eye. Only Lenore stayed behind, helping me stack coffee cups in the sink, her quiet presence a steady reminder of why I'd done this. A year later, my life looked different in all the ways that mattered. I lived in a modest, sunlit home with a small garden I tended every morning, just a short walk from Lenore's new, fully paid-for bungalow. She'd insisted on keeping it simple, but it had wide doorways for when her knees acted up and a kitchen she loved. I'd left my old job and poured my energy into the nonprofit I'd founded, an organization dedicated to helping isolated seniors with everything from companionship visits to small home repairs. We'd grown faster than I expected, with volunteers who shared the same quiet commitment Lenore had always shown me. My contact with the rest of the family stayed cordial but shallow holiday calls, polite small talk when real emergencies arose. I sometimes stepped in anonymously, paying a hospital bill here, covering a rehab fee there. They never knew the source, and I preferred it that way, looking back. I realized the money had been a gift, but it wasn't the real prize. What I'd gained was clarity knowing who stood beside me without expectation, and the freedom to choose my circle without guilt. Peace, I learned, wasn't bought, it was built. That spring. Lenore and I sat on her porch, watching the light fade over the neighborhood we now shared. She reached over, gave my hand a small squeeze, and said, "We did good. Kiddo." I smiled, knowing she was right and that the best things I'd earned couldn't be measured in dollars at all.